Along with Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, Rollo May was one of the founders and leaders of the humanistic psychology movement. In the 1950s, he was also one of the first thinkers in the field of psychotherapy to formulate a view of human nature that was not based on Freudian principles. One of his main insights was a conviction that much of human behavior and personality is motivated by a profound underlying sense of anxiety, which he felt was important to address in psychotherapy. In his book, The Meaning of Anxiety, May challenged the idea that mental health is living without anxiety, believing it is essential to being human. He convincingly proposed that anxiety can impel personal change, and it is only by confronting and coping with it that self-realization can occur. Although existentialism is known for its emphasis on anxiety, May offered a solution: love. Not the fluffy thinking of romantic love or infatuation, but the solid, thoughtful love that shows care, concern, and a willingness to be helpful. Rollo May was born in Ohio in 1909 but grew up in Michigan. After graduating from Oberlin College in 1930, he spent 3 years as an itinerant artist roaming throughout Eastern and Southern Europe. May, much like Carl Jung, had experienced and worked himself through a nervous breakdown during his 20s in Greece. When he returned to the United States, he entered the Union Theological Seminary, from which he received a Master of Divinity degree. He then served for 2 years as a pastor but quit in order to pursue a career in psychology. He received a PhD in clinical psychology from Columbia University in 1949 at the relatively advanced age of 40. That was the first PhD in clinical psychology ever granted by Columbia University. He published the book The Meaning of Anxiety in 1950. During his professional career, he served as a lecturer or visiting professor at a number of universities, conducted a private practice as a psychotherapist, and wrote a number of popular books on the human condition. May died in 1994 at the age of 85. Existential psychology began in Europe shortly after World War II and spread to the United States, where Rollo May played a large part in popularizing it. May's perspective on personality is based on his clinical experience rather than scientific research. His view is that modern people often run away from both making choices and assuming responsibility. He felt that people need to live in the present and they are responsible for their experiences. People lack courage to face destiny, and healthy people challenge destiny and live authentically. Living inauthentically refers to not accepting personal responsibility. We are both free and limited by environmental and social constraints. An existential theme is that people are free to choose among alternatives and therefore play a large part in shaping their destinies. Existential therapy embraces these values related to freedom: the freedom to become within the context of natural and self-imposed limitations, the capacity to reflect on the meaning of those choices, and the capacity to act on the choices we make. Another existential idea is that although we long for freedom, we often try to escape from our freedom by defining ourselves narrowly or in a fixed way. We didn't have a choice about being thrust into the world, as May would put it, but the way we live and what we become are the result of our choices. Because of this freedom, our job is to accept responsibility for directing the course of our lives. Viktor Frankl is another well-known existentialist, and he said the United States has a Statue of Liberty on the East Coast, but needs a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast to balance it out. Existentialism is a philosophically deep subject, so you may want to take some extra time to study this chapter. The first tenet of existentialism is that existence takes precedence over essence, meaning that process and growth are more important. Existence means to emerge or become. It involves movement or a process of growth. Essence refers to stagnation or finality or being done. Second, existentialists oppose the artificial split between subject and object. It involves the fact that we are part of the world and not isolated cogs, as the text puts it. Anxiety can stem from not being connected to the world. Third, existentialists stress people's search for meaning in their lives. Fourth, they insist that each of us is responsible for who we are and what we become. Fifth, most existentialists take an anti-theoretical position, believing that theories tend to objectify people. When people are seen within a theory, they are objects rather than unique individuals. Some basic concepts. According to existentialists, a basic unity exists between people and their environments, a unity expressed by the term Dasein, or being in the world. Three simultaneous modes of the world characterize us in our Dasein: Umwelt, or the environment around us; Mitwelt, or our world with other people; and Eigenwelt, or our relationship with ourself. Healthy people live in all three simultaneously. People are both aware of themselves as living beings and also aware of the possibility of non-being or nothingness. Death is the most obvious form of non-being, which can also be expressed as a retreat or pulling away from life's experiences. This awareness of non-being leads to existential anxiety or dread. Rollo May helped illustrate his concepts of existential theory and therapy by the case of Philip, a successful architect in his mid-50s. Despite his apparent success, Philip experienced severe anxiety when his relationship with Nicole, a writer in her mid-40s, took a puzzling turn. Uncertain of his future and suffering from low self-esteem, Philip went into therapy with Rollo May. Eventually, Philip was able to understand that his difficulties with women were related to his early experiences with a mother who was unpredictable and an older sister who suffered from severe mental disorders. However, he began to recover only after he accepted that his need to take care of unpredictable Nicole was merely part of his personal history with unstable women, and that he had the freedom to make choices, and he could take responsibility for his destiny. Existentialists believe human behavior is motivated by a sense of dread and anxiety. People experience anxiety when they become aware that their existence or something identified with it might be destroyed. The acquisition of freedom inevitably leads to anxiety, which can either be pleasurable and constructive or painful and destructive. Rollo May identified normal anxiety and neurotic anxiety. Growth produces normal anxiety, defined as that which is proportionate to the threat, does not involve repression, and can be handled on a conscious level. Neurotic anxiety, on the other hand, is a reaction that is disproportionate to the threat and that leads to repression and defensive behaviors. It is felt whenever one's values are transformed into dogma. Neurotic activity blocks growth and productive action. Guilt is often closely related to anxiety. Guilt arises whenever people deny their potentialities, fail to accurately perceive the needs of others, or remain blind to their dependence on the natural world. Both anxiety and guilt are ontological. That is, they refer to the nature of being and not to feelings arising from specific situations. Ontological means it's part of life for all of us. There are three forms of ontological guilt. Umwelt means guilt arising from being detached from nature. Relying on others for food, transportation, and other needs leaves us feeling this type of ontological guilt when we become detached from nature and the natural course of life. So we are removed from the realities of death and simply being another creature on this earth. Midwelt relates to being connected to others, and I would say our reliance on technology has really separated us from others. Emails, tweets, for example, have changed the way we interact with others. A distancing has occurred, and we rely more and more on seeing the world through our own eyes rather than through others. May said this guilt arises through our separate individuality. Eigenwelt relates to the poor relationship with oneself and not reaching our potential. This type of guilt is similar to Maslow's Jonah complex. Anxiety and guilt can be either positive or negative, depending on how we use them. The structure that gives meaning to experience and allows people to make decisions about the future is called intentionality. May believe that intentionality permits people to overcome the dichotomy between subject and object because it enables them to see that their intentions are a function of both themselves and their environment. For May, intentionality is at the heart of consciousness. Our intentions are important with respect to how we perceive the world. May explained if he were to go to see a house up in the mountains, what he sees would depend on what he was looking for in a house. If he was looking for a house to rent for the summer for some friends, then when he approached the house, he would question if it is sound and well built, gets enough sun, and he would assess if it has other things that would have the meaning of shelter for him. On the other hand, if he were a real estate speculator, then what would strike him is how easily the house could be fixed up, whether it will bring a price attractively higher than that what he has to pay for it, and other things, meaning profit. Or let's say it is a house belonging to friends he is visiting. Then he would look on it in terms of hospitality. A simple little exercise you can do on your own is to crumple up a piece of paper and then put it down and then write down the things that you see that are unique about that crumpled piece of paper. Find as many things as you can that make it unique. It is only through intentionality that you bridge the gap between subject and object. When you intentionally look for uniqueness, it seems to have more and more detail. Whatever you're looking at begins to have more meaning. Care is an active process that suggests that things matter. Love means to care, to delight in the presence of another person, and to affirm that person's value as much as one's own. Care is also an important ingredient in will, defined as a conscious commitment to action. Let's look more closely at the union of love and will. May believe that our modern society has lost sight of the true nature of love and will, equating love with sex and will with willpower. He further held that psychologically healthy people are able to combine love and will because both imply care and also choice, action, and responsibility. Some may wonder at what seems like a juxtaposition of love and will, but in his book, Love and Will, May believed that love and will are interdependent and belong together. Both are connective processes of being. Love and will join together and involve a reaching out to influence others and to create a relationship. But this is only possible in an inner sense if one opens oneself at the same time to the influence of the other. And will without love becomes manipulation. May also identified 4 kinds of love in the Western tradition: sex, eros, philia, and agape. He believed that Americans no longer view sex as a natural biological function, but have become preoccupied with it to the point of trivializing it. Eros is a psychological desire that seeks an enduring union with a loved one. It may include sex, but it is built on care and tenderness. Philia, an intimate non-sexual friendship between two people, takes time to develop and does not depend on the actions of the other person. It is also referred to as a brotherly love. Agape is an altruistic or spiritual love that carries with it the risk of playing God. Agape is undeserved and given unconditionally. Psychologically healthy people are comfortable with freedom, able to assume responsibility for their choices, and willing to face their destiny. Freedom comes from an understanding of our destiny. We are free when we recognize that death is a possibility at any moment, and when we are willing to experience changes, even in the face of not knowing what those changes will bring. May recognized two forms of freedom: freedom of doing or freedom of action, which he called existential freedom, and freedom of being or an inner freedom, which he called essential freedom. May defined destiny as the design of the universe speaking through the design of each one of us. In other words, our destiny includes the limitations of our environment and our personal qualities, including our morality, gender, and genetic predispositions. Freedom and destiny are intertwined because freedom means the possibility of changing, and destiny gains significance from freedom. Freedom allows us to change destiny. Let's go back to Philip's destiny. After some time in therapy, Philip was able to stop blaming his mother for not doing what he thought she should have done. The objective facts of his childhood had not changed, but Philip's subjective perceptions had. He came to terms with his destiny. Philip began to express his anger, to feel less trapped in his relationship with Nicole, and to become more aware of his possibilities. In other words, he gained his freedom. According to May, the people of contemporary Western civilization have an urgent need for myths. Because they have lost many of their traditional myths, they turn to religious cults, drugs, and popular culture to fill the vacuum. The Oedipus myth has had a powerful effect on Western culture because it deals with such common existential crises as birth, separation from parents, and hostility toward a parent, independence in one's search for identity, and finally death. People communicate on two levels: rationalistic language, which involves facts and figures, and myth, which involves the human condition. Myths and stories help us to see patterns and connections we have with others, as well as finding meaning in our lives. May saw apathy and emptiness, and not anxiety or depression, as the chief existential disorders of our time. People have become alienated from the natural world, Umwelt, from other people, Mitwelt, and from themselves, Eigenwelt. These symptoms can be temporary or permanent. Psychopathology is a lack of connectedness or an inability to know others and to share oneself with them. The goal of psychotherapy is not to cure patients of any specific disorder, but rather to make them more fully human. May said that the purpose of psychotherapy is to set people free. That is, to allow them to make choices and to assume responsibility for those choices. There are no formal structured techniques in existential psychotherapy, but it is the relationship itself that is therapeutic. Similar to Rogers, May said that the therapeutic relationship is what facilitates growth. May's psychology has been legitimately criticized as being anti-theoretical and unjustly criticized as being anti-intellectual. May's anti-theoretical approach calls for a new kind of science, one that considers uniqueness and personal freedom as crucial concepts in personality theory. However, according to the criteria of present science, May's theory rates low on most standards. More specifically, it has a very low rating on its ability to generate research, to be falsified, and to guide action. Low on internal consistency because it lacks operationally defined terms. Average on parsimony, and high on its organization. due to its consideration of a broad scope of the human condition. May viewed people as complex beings capable of both tremendous good and immense evil. People had become alienated from the world, from other people, and most of all, from themselves. On the dimensions of a concept of humanity, May rates high on free choice, teleology, social influences, and uniqueness. On the issue of conscious or unconscious forces, his theory seems to take a middle position.